Okay, our last type of limit that we're going to look at when you get 0 over 0 are the limits with trig. Okay, so again, these are still limits where we're getting 0 over 0. Okay, so the last one we have is sine of x over x. Okay, so if you look at the graph of sine of x over x, you're going to see it looks something like this, but there's an open circle here. Okay, so from the right and from the left, they both approach 1. Okay, but it's just undefined for this brief second at 0, because that would give us 0 over 0. So anytime you see sine of x over x, that limit will always be 1. Okay? And it works for any multiple of x. So if you have a sine of 4x, it needs to be over 4x. So when you're finding that limit, and this is always going to be, as x approaches 0 for these, it's going to be 1. So for the sine of x over x, your x value will always be approaching 0. If it was anything other than 0, like if it was a pi over 3, then you would just plug it in. Okay, so this is only as x approaches 0 and only for sine of x over x. So if we look here, okay, we've got the limit as x approaches 0. Remember, sine of 0 is 0 over 0. So what we want to do is this part right here. So that sine of x over x, it's like I can separate these. So it's like I have sine of x over x times, we still have this extra 2. There's a 1 left up there. So this part right here, I know that that's going to be 1, making my limit 1/2 times 1. So just 1/2. So for number 2, this time we have a reciprocal. Okay? So anytime you're evaluating limits, if it's not in terms of sine and cosine, change it to sine and cosine if it's in approaches 0, 1. So what we're going to do is rewrite this as the limit as x approaches 0. I'm going to leave the x up here. Cosecant goes with sine. Okay. So we said that anytime it's sine of x over x as x approaches 0, that limit is 1. It also works the other way around. Okay. So both of those limits would be 1. Okay. But here I have a 4x. Okay. So whatever's in sine, so whatever this is, it needs to match the x on top. So what I have to do is multiply what's on top by 4. And so to keep this fraction equal, I also have to multiply the bottom by 4. And then that reason is because we want this to match. Okay, so whatever number you have right here, you have to have the same number there. So this part, so I'm just going to isolate that part. So I have 4x over sine of x, sine of 4x, times what's left over. Well, there's nothing left in the numerator. There's a 4 left in the bottom. Okay, so this part is going to be 1. So I'm just left with 1/4 for our limit. Okay, so now we have a limit with tangent. So I'm going to rewrite it in terms of sine and cosine. Okay. So tangent is sine over cosine. So this is going to be sine of x over cosine of x, and this 3x is going to stay in the denominator with the cosine. So I always write the trig part last. Okay. So what we want to do is separate our sine of x over x. Okay. So this is just an x. So I just want the x here. I want to leave the 3 out of it. Okay, so I've got sine of x over x times what's left. So I'm left with, in the denominator, a 3 and a cosine of x. So there's just a 1 up here. Okay, so this part we know is going to be 1. Then I just need to plug in the 0. So 3 times cosine of 0. Remember, cosine of 0 is 1. You're going to do sine and cosine of 0 a lot. Okay, so remember 0, that's just the angle over here. So the x value is cosine, the y value is sine. Okay. So cosine of 0 is 1, so that's 1 over 3 times 1, so 1/3. Okay, now let's look at one last example. Okay, we have 3x cotangent of 4x. Okay. So cotangent, that's the reciprocal of tangent. So tangent is sine over cosine, so cotangent is going to be cosine over sine. So since it's a 4x, it stays a 4x. Okay, and so now we're trying to match. Okay, so since I have sine of 4x, I need this to be a 4x. So what I have to do is multiply by 4. So I also have to multiply by 4 in the denominator. If you're going to multiply the top of a fraction, so if you multiply the top of a fraction by a number, you have to multiply the bottom of a fraction by a number, because if you multiply by 4 divided by 4, that's just multiplying by 1, which doesn't change anything. So then what I want to do is isolate the sine of 4x and the 4x on top. Okay. So this will be 4x over sine of 4x. Okay, that limit we know is going to be 1 times what's left. So what's left in the numerator is 3 cosine of 4x. What's left in the denominator is a 4. So this limit will be 1 times, this will be 3 cosine of 4 times 0, so cosine of 0 over 4. So cosine of 0 is 1, so that's 3 times 1, 3 over 4. So that limit will be 3/4.